me, people on the East Coast, those folks out there. I'm on the SANS advisory board, basically curriculum and paper grading and advice and talks and stuff. For a couple of my good friends that are going to be watching this later, Mark, Scott, Jeff, we're going to be talking about, these are not hashes that you solve, these are not hashes that you smoke, these are not hashes that you tag somebody with, they're not octothorpes. We're going to be talking about dumping them, cracking them, and passing them at the very end. So this is basic overview of stuff I'm going to be going through. I'm excited to talk about all this stuff. I love this topic, and I have a ton of content, so I'm going to try to go through it quickly enough. I'll get my slides posted afterwards, and the video will be up as well, so you get some of the detailed content that you may not have been able to pick up here. And I've got a couple of slides at the very end as far as passing hashes and what the new techniques and things that are coming up, people are doing with them right now that are really exciting. So I want to see if I can get to that and leave some time for some questions. So general quick history of it. Right around 2000, there's another stuff that goes prior to this, but 2000-ish, you've got the KW dump, suite of tools, FG dump, etc. These are all using LSAS injection. They inject code into LSAS server process. What that wound up doing, back then and still currently, but not as much, is it'll make that LSAS process a little bit unstable because you're modifying it in memory, you're injecting code into it. And one of the common failures of that back then was you would wind up getting a server error message that the LSAS process has become corrupt and the server's going to reboot like in 60 seconds. And when you're on a pen test, when you're trying to be stealthy on a network, that's really not what you want to have happen. Coming up to about 2007, H.D. Moore and the Metasploit project introduced a new priv module called HashDump. It's essentially doing a similar thing. What we wind up coming up with as far as injecting code into the LSAS process, and what he wound up coming up with was injecting raw assembly code into LSAS in memory, and it was a lot more stable. But what wound up happening was antivirus companies started hooking the API and checking for that action, that activity to be happening. And so the AV companies checking his stable process to dump hashes wound up making the systems unstable, and the LSAS would crash and the systems would reboot. So that was kind of amusing. Coming forward a little bit to 2010, in the Metasploit project also introduced a new module, new method. Use run HashDump, and basically he would extract the contents of the protected registry entries, the system and SAM entries, and extract that in memory. It was a lot slower. You did not need system access. No, you still need system access to do that, but there's no process injection happening. It's a lot safer on systems. But again, you have to be able to be escalated to the point of having the NC Authority system access on a system in order to do that. So that's the level to entry there. A little bit more recently, Benjamin Delby, a French gentleman, released a tool you probably heard of, Mimikatz. Fantastic tool, does a ton of amazing things. You can spend an entire talk talking just about that. Wound up finding a way to dump the clear text passwords directly from the Windows Digest provider on a Windows system. And you wind up uncovering the fact that Windows, when you log into a Windows system and you use your password, you log in, your current password that you used to log in is now held in clear text in memory on that Windows system in the Windows Digest provider, so that it can then pass that credential to whatever service that you have to go log into as part of your Windows session. You're browsing a file share, you're connected to SSL enabled website. It holds your password there so that you don't have to continue to re-enter it. And Microsoft came up with a funny term for that. They call it credential fatigue, is what they're preventing by keeping your password in plain text. So long passwords, 30, 40, passphrase, it's all plain text right there if you use Mimikatz. Still uses process injection for that, so that's not what I'm going to be talking about. A little bit later, you've got a tool that was put together to use a process, use the volume shadow copy process. Talked about, I believe it was DerbyCon 2. I was thinking it was 1, but I think it was 2. Mark Baggett and Tim Tomes put together a tool called vssown, which essentially just is a Visual Basic script that wraps the volume shadow copy service, uses it to list current volume shadow copies, create a new one if you want to, delete it when you're done, and the fantastic thing about this is you're not injecting anything into the LSASS process. You're going through and you're going through basically using the Windows regular copy commands to copy locked files like the system, the NTDS.dit file, the SAM file, off to whatever working directory that you can then copy it off of that system to. Fantastic stuff. And then even more recently, a gentleman by the name of Climber, the handle Climber, I don't know who he is or met him or talked to him at all, released a PowerShell script called, as part of the powersploit framework, called invoke ninjacopy. And awesome name, awesome tool. Essentially it goes through and it also is just using the regular Windows, it parses the NTFS file structure directly, accesses the disk directly. It's not using the Windows API to go access the file, and so for that reason, it can wind up getting around file systems like the SACL and DACL file locks, where Windows says, you're not allowed to copy this file because it's in use by another process. Well, it's not using the regular Windows API, so it just accesses that file directly. It goes, great, thanks, I'm going to go copy this. Files that are locked by ACLs, like only the system is able to access it, says, great, I'm not going through the API. System, yeah, who cares? I'm just going to copy the file. And he's accessing it directly. File's there on the disk, copy. You've got it now. So, let's see. So methods, non-process injection methods. Some of these are a little bit older. You wind up having a scenario where you can use these. It's going to be a little bit more rare, but the last two are definitely relevant. Reboot a domain controller to a live CD, copy the files off the ED because they're no longer locked. Steal a virtual container. There was a flaw in earlier versions of ESX and GSX, the other VMware server application, where it was a directory traversal flaw that they published the names and the locations of the containers for all the VMs were running on a particular server, and all you need to do is essentially was a // etc. with a wget command, and you can just go copy it, list the VM files that you wanted, and then just copy them off the server, via the directory traversal copy there. If you've got a find or you have a rogue ESX administrator that's willing to give you a copy of the VM, then you can get a copy of it that way. NetSplay, use the run hash dump module. It's going to extract the data directly from the registry, so there's no LSASS injection happening there. And then the volume shadow copy service, like I talked about, and the ninjacopy powersploit script. Those are all ways to go about that are non-LSASS injection methods. So some of these I'm going to kind of run through. You obviously need access to the domain controller. A gentleman from Cloudflare that spoke yesterday, I imagine he'd have a hard time getting access to the DCs in his environment based on the limited account usage and expiring that he's putting together. So that sounds like a really good deal. Let's say that you have a password and you want to use a hash to access the system, which I'll cover some of those tools towards the end of this. There's a great tool called GenHash, which I believe is part of the Windows credential editor. Hernan or Ochoa released a set of tools to be able to generate landman and anti-landman hashes as well. So just a short example of a couple of tools that you could use to gain access to DCs or dump the credentials and information once you're there. What I've listed here is an example of using a WinExe tool, which is a patched version of the Samba WinExe tool, where it's essentially a PSExec functionality, except they patched it in order for you to be able to use hashes in place of the password. And what you wind up doing with this is export SMB hash, export the landman and anti-landman hash of the account you want to use. All your executable, designate the IP address, tell them what user you're authenticating as, designate either system or not system if you want, what context you want to run in, and then the command you want to run. So in this case, I'm doing command cmd.exe. It asks you for a password. You don't have to you have to enter something in the password field, but it doesn't care what it is because it's going to ignore it. soon as you enter that, hit enter, it's going to tell you substituting the password hash in place of the password in order to authenticate to that system. The system will say, oh great, you've got a valid hash? Fantastic. Here's your command prompt. In this case, I designated system, and who am I? NT authority system running on that system that I was on. A note about smart cards and like fingerprint readers for fingerprint encryption. The reason I put that on there. In that instance, you don't have a password that you could actually use, that you could actually type into a console and authenticate as a particular account. But there's been flaws in the past where in fingerprint encryption, where if you're using a little swipe on your laptop or whatever else, a smart card to log into a system, there's cases where certain implementations where they will store some sort of encoded representation, right? Not encrypted, but encoded representation of your password hash of your password in the registry. And if you go look for that in the registry, decode it. It's not, there's no cracking involved, it's just you decode it or decrypt it with the key that it's using. And you've got the plain text password right there again. So that's another possibility. One thing that's interesting as far as if you need to wind up loading up tools onto a domain controller, it's got antivirus loaded, hopefully, installed on it. Look for, if you're in an enterprise, look for common directories that the current antivirus tool is excluding from being scanned. A lot of times, database administrators will say, please exclude this database directory because I have a ton of large, constantly changing files that I don't want AV to exclude. And sometimes, if you've got an enterprise that just says, great, we'll exclude that database directory for you, we've approved it, but maybe it's not just on those database servers, maybe it's the entire enterprise-wide, every single PC, it's gotten pushed to. Find that directory, load up your tools that may be caught by antivirus like Mimikatz or versions of WinExe or whatever. Load them up there, no AV detection, and go use them. So examples of the volume shadow copy service. It gives you in the vssown VBS script that Mark and Tim put together. Gives you some abilities, it basically wraps the service so that you can list all the current shadow copies that exist. You can start the volume shadow copy service if it's not started, so that you can create one. You can create a new volume shadow copy, and then you can, it should have been deleted at the end, you can delete them, designated by the shadow copy ID as well. And so volume shadow copies, if you're not familiar with, is I think it was created. I think the primary use of it is so that backup operators can back up systems that have files that are currently locked by that system. And so you can go to a backup of the whole system, get the entire system, no matter if the file is locked or not. And so the situation that you wind up with is it creates I don't know the right terms for it. It creates like kind of like a differential snapshot, like a tiny diff of the file system. And so when you then go and let's see here, this example. So there's a copy. So you then go and you reference. I want to go access volume shadow copy number 73 in this case, and I'm going to access via that direct file system directory, which is // global root device. You're accessing it directly from the device, but you're accessing, for instance, the NTDS.dit file, the SAM file, the system file, which are files that are locked for use because they're currently in use, and they're also designated as only system should be able to have access to these files. And in this instance, I'm not running as system, I'm running as regular administrator on this box. And what you're doing is you're accessing that file that is now no longer in use because it's a tiny diff of whatever the file used to be plus the current diff. And it just says, oh, you want this file? Great, it's not locked. Here you go. Copy, file name, current directory, and let's see, there's that. And there's the example of that working. So in a command console that I'm running as currently, copy command, copy this file to the current directory, file copy, copy system, file copy. Straightforward. And then those systems are no longer locked because they're no longer in use. Copy them off that system, export, dump and export, and now you've got password usernames and password hashes. One of the things that I've found useful is in a domain, let's say you're on a domain that company's domain has existed for several years. They've had, a large organization, let's say, they've had a number of users that are coming and going, terminated, contractors that show up, terminated user accounts. The NTDS.dit file can grow to be several hundred megs in size. The largest one that I've seen on a pen test has been, I think it was close to about 700 megs of the NTDS.dit file. And so one of the things that I realized and needed to do, if you're running over a slow, low bandwidth link or high latency where your connection continues to keeps dropping, you don't want to sit there and run a copy command off of the domain controller, remotely to your local system that you're copying like a 700 meg file. It's going to fail. It's going to keep timing out. You're not going to wind up getting it. Maybe eventually, somebody's going to look at a large file transfer, leaving their domain controller to somewhere else across the network and go, hey, what's going on? Let's find out who this guy is who's plugged into this port, and then somebody's standing at your desk, right? So if you've got the ability to load up some additional tools, for instance, load up something like a command line with RAR compressor or a 7-zip compressor, and a command here I've got is RAR A for create an archive. RR2P, create a recovery, 2% recovery designator inside the file just in case something gets corrupted, it can rebuild that. EP1, let's see, create the archive in the name of the computer name, just so something that's memorable for you. You can reference it later, and then create a password around that. And in this instance, I'm using the computer name as the password, just so that you've got a RAR archive that is password protected. Maybe it's a simple password, maybe you insert something new there, but it's not something that somebody's going to go across and you're not going to have an analysis tool just go, oh look, a zip file, or oh look, an RAR archive. Let me open it and analyze what's in it. Sometimes just a basic password on that is going to prevent that default analysis from happening. Just protects you just a little bit more from being detected. Let's see. So the invoke ninjacopy PowerShell script. Also, absolutely fascinating. In this example, this is all that. So this is going through. You're in a PowerShell console on your local system. Is where this context is coming from. Execute the script. Tell what path of the remote system you want to copy your file from. So I'm designated C Windows System 2. Looking at the SAM file. Tell a remote destination. So in this case, I'm copying it from the local system to another directory on the local system as well, so that I'll copy it off later. And then designate the computer name, and this is whatever server you're targeting there. And it's that straightforward. You've got the credentials to use on the DC in your current session. Enter, copy. Copies those remote files that are usually locked and restricted. In order to, once you've got a copy of the NTDS.dit file, the system file, the SAM file, how do you extract it? So it's a sparsely generated file that has a ton of white space, which is why it gets so huge, but there's a ton of data in it as well. There's a gentleman, I believe he's out of Brazil, Gustavo Barta, that put together some tools, the libESIDB tools, in order to extract, Microsoft has documented the structure of the NTDS.dit file. So he's put together some tools in order to extract usernames, landman hashes, anti-landman hashes, and a bunch of other things that I haven't really gone into and used yet because I haven't needed to. It's a small info on the location, what it is. I believe the NTDS extract library of 1.0, I believe is still the current thing there. And then he's got I believe it's a DSUsers.py file in that archive of tools. And what he winds up doing is, it's a Python script that will extract the usernames and the landman and the anti-landman hashes. But it's not in a format that is nice, immediately consumable from tools like John Ripper or OCL Hashcat in order to start cracking those passwords. Gentleman, shoot, who was it? Blanking on the name now. Somebody put together a script that was just basically a patch of his DSUsers Python file for DS hashes, And it was like the same German presentation. It was Tim Tomes, Mark Baggett, maybe it was those two gentlemen that put this together. And essentially it takes, it extracts that data, that username, landman, and NT-landman hash from the NTDS.dit file, and extracts it into an immediately consumable file format that John the Ripper can then, you can just set, point John the Ripper directly at it, and it's in the right, username, colon, landman, NT-landman hash format. And it makes it really straightforward. One of the things, so here's an example of extracting the contents from the NTDS.dit file. It's basically, what is it, export, point it to the file, exports all the tables and things that you need to then extract from. Another example of the same. So at the bottom you'll see, this can take a while based on, once it's actually extracting these hashes. It can take a little while based on the number, the size of your domain, the number of users that exist there. So running the dshashes.py script gives you these options for what you want to export. Designate -- password hashes and the system time, but it'll give you obviously the current user password hashes. You can also designate -- password history. And there's a fascinating to me, let's see, it's another example, there it is. Fascinating property of Windows Active Directory domain controllers is, by default, if you don't go in and change this, which I recommend changing to some smaller number than 24, by default, AD domain controllers will retain the last 24 historical passwords that all of your users have ever used. So you can extract just the current ones, but you can also go back and extract all of the historical ones as well. And so in this case, let's see, so you've got a size of current hashes of 52 records in this case, and a size of historical records of 282 in this instance. And it'll list them out. NT password, here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've seen domain controllers where all 24 are listed there, and it's incredible. Yeah.
24 is the default, but
yes.
My thought is, since that matches the retained password history, you want the retained password history because I know our users would simply reuse their passwords. You
Sure.
don't want that happening either. And I would guess there's probably more of a risk unless you can lock this down.
Sure. So, gentlemen mentioned, wouldn't you want all those 24 passwords in history? Therefore, you can use so that users can't reuse their last 24 passwords. I don't know if it's actually tied to that list, if Windows is actually querying that or not. There may be, and I don't know for sure, but there may be a different module that you can load into Active Directory that checks for that. That I'm not clear about, but yeah, possibly. I would generally err on the side of having less of these, and I'll tell you about that in a second here. Well, essentially, have you ever had, if you've been doing password analysis, password cracking, have you seen instances where users reuse the same sorts of passwords, either the same password, like in this instance, you've got, for this user on top, you can tell they had an initial password, they had a secondary password, decided to change it back to the initial password again. So these four here, the first one, they just said, you know what, I like my first password, and if you're not either not checking for reused passwords, or the case where a user may go to a support person and say, hey, I'm having trouble changing my password. Can you log into the DC and I can change my password manually? Change it manually, you're not restricted to using it, to be not using it in your previous passwords. So in this case, who knows who that was that may have happened in that situation, because you see they're using the same password 5 different times, they changed it once and decided to change it back.
Sorry, you said you weren't sure if you set in your in preferences that they can't reuse the last 12 passwords. You said you were not sure whether that then was stored that same 12 in the history.
So the question was, am I sure if the password history here is what's referenced for users not being able to reuse the same passwords or not? No, I'm not certain if that's the case or not. I would guess that it's not based on these being stored, but yeah, I don't actually know. Not sure what that's referenced exactly. One of the things that the DS hashes tool will do in order to generate a instantly usable John the Ripper format is, you see I've highlighted two of these hashes here, the landman hash here on this side and the NT-landman hash on the far side, is since the username and the landman hash and then the username and the NT hash, if you look at the raw output of this file, they're not, it doesn't come out in this format directly. And so you'll get the username and the landman hash, and just those two things are paired up, but that's not a correct John the Ripper format. Or you'll get the username and the NT password hash, but it's also not the correct John the Ripper format. So what he winds up doing is he'll take, you've got the in this case NT password hash. He winds up putting the password hash of the password, and then the correct NT hash. And so in this instance, you don't have the landman hash in this location, but later on, you've got the landman history password hashes stored. So here's the actual landman password hash, and we don't have the NT hash in that instance. So he just puts in the NT hash of password, so that you wind up with a correct, instantly consumable John the Ripper formatted file. And that's one thing to take into consideration while you're cracking those is you're going to have 5,000 hits for the password. Well, it's not actually that password. You've got to look at what it is that is actually showing up there.
Question.
Take that
if you insulted those passwords, then you wouldn't have had that problem, would you? Because each one of those would have been different, even though it was the same password.
Yes, but we're talking Windows Active Directory domain controllers. So this is the format you get. This is the data that it spits out to you.
So you're saying that that's basically a default. It's a placeholder.
Right.
Right. So whether it's salted or not is irrelevant.
Right. Yeah. It's talking.
As a matter of fact, it's probably easier to compute if you use the same thing and then you can recognize it.
Yeah, and this is like these entries here for the hash of the password, and the landman hash of password, and the NT hash of password. Those are not coming out of the DC. That's something that's generated by the DSH's script to make your format consumable instantly by Docker. All the data is still there. It's just you're duplicating some of it. So setting that as part of the defaults there. Just quick overview of cracking method if you're using John. Straightforward. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. What you wind up with, as an example, it's slowly going through the list, and there's the example of password being cracked from that hash, and then slowly going through the rest of the NT list. So here's the first half of it where it's cracked that landman hash of the landman NT-landman password. Here's the second half of it where it's going through password. It's password generated here that it's cracking. So it's getting all of those things that you know that you put there on purpose so that you can just have the right file format. One of the things, let's see, great, okay. One of the things that there's a great blog post that was put together by, I don't know the name of this gentleman, he's on that blog, about fingerprint attack using OCL hashcat. And the idea is that if you've got the historical password hash list off of a domain controller, how many times do you wind up seeing users that will use, Cindy123, Cindy12345, Cindy1234556? They'll add a character, or January 12, or January 13, whatever. And so if you wind up having a current user's password that you can't quite crack, maybe you go through the entire historical password list and you get a handful of those, and then feed that now word list that you've just generated from the passwords that were easy enough to crack back into using some word what's the word for it?
Generator.
Generators to expand that now word list of known cracked passwords that you've got, and re-crack the same password list that you've been working on. You'll get more permutations of that, because maybe you were checking for password 123 and it was password 123 act or something. It'll expand that in all these different lists, and you'll be able to crack more based on just that same password list. So tools. So this is these last two slides are what are a ton of fascinating work that's going on right now. The core security has a set of libraries that just go search for impacket, the IMPACKET, libraries, and it's a Google Code hosted project that they've given back to the community currently, and it's fantastic. They've re-implemented a ton of Samba and WMyExec and SMB tools. They've re-implemented a ton of those tools into Python scripts. So you've got like a PSExec functionality in a Python script. And the thing that they've done that is even more fantastic after that, you can use password hashes with all of these tools. So you can mount file shares using a username and a password hash. You can run a WMyExec, which is similar to PSExec, just using WMy. It gives you what they call a semi-interactive shell, where you're executing. You open a session to a server with WMyExec. You designate on the command line, this server, this username, this password hash. Let's say you don't have the password, but you have a hash, so use that. And it'll give you like I say, a semi-interactive shell, because it's not an interactive like PSExec shell. It's making the connection every time and saying those commands, but it presents it to you as a you've got a C prompt, and you can execute what you need to execute on that server. WCE, Windows Credential Editor, both from Hernando Ochoa, both dumps hashes as well as you can change. It's a Windows tool. You can change the current user context of the process that you're running in. So let's say you're logged in as Joe, and you want to change your current context of who you're running as to Steve or Chris or somebody who has admin rights on your network. You've got that hash, you've designated with the Windows Credential Editor tool, and all of a sudden the session or the window that you're using in Windows is now running in that other user context. And you just use your regular tools across the domain from that that window now on your own system. Mimikatz can both dump hashes, dump clear text credentials, pass them as well. Getting into, if anybody was at or saw the DEF CON talk about passing Kerberos tickets, Mimikatz is what's going to do that for you. Mentioned earlier in the talk here, patch Samba tools like WinExe. It's a standard Samba tool, but it's open source. People have provided patches for it that'll now it'll accept using password hashes instead of passwords, which is tremendously useful. There's on the who is it? Chris Campbell and Alvin Duckwall, I believe, Skip Duckwall, have a blog called passingthehash.blogspot.com, where they talk about even using Firefox so you can download, Firefox being an open source project as well. They've got the source code posted. You can take the source code. There's some patches for Firefox that you can patch, and then it's a few hours worth of time to build Firefox. But there's build instructions. You can then compile it and use Firefox in your Active Directory, SSO type of environment where you're looking to authenticate to SharePoint or an internal, IIS hosted server that's using your integrated auth. You can now use Firefox to provide your username and not a credential, but a password hash of that credential, and authenticate to that server. So there's patches for Firefox that'll do that. There's a RDP tool on Linux that's been patched for that as well. X-Free RDP. Also, fascinating work. Basically, it takes care of, you can use a username and hash, not the password, but the hash, again, to authenticate to a remote desktop session on, I believe it's Windows 2012 R2 servers, where this is just mind-blowing when I saw it, and Windows 2012 R2 introduced a feature called restricted admin, where if you log in with this /restricted admin flag to an RDP session on 2012 R2, it will not store your current credentials in memory on that server while you're logged in, which is fantastic. It sounds good, right? It's preventing the Mimikatz type of memory password dumping attacks, except what they wound up exposing in the same situation, the same patch or the same feature, was you can now use X-Free RDP, the patched version that's available on Kali Linux, or you can patch it and compile it yourself. You can authenticate to a 2012 R2 server using the hash, and there's no further authentication. You get the if you have a banner, you get the OK, accept the banner, and it logs you straight in. Generally not something that you could even post a video demo of, because the entire string that you need to log into that server is just the one command line. Like, that's all you need. Enter. You've got a now GUI console session on that RDP server. So just, what's today, Friday, so 3 days ago, Microsoft released an out-of-band patch a little bit later on the same day, on Tuesday, from their Patch Tuesday stuff, KB 287.1997, that addresses that restricted admin mode. And if you apply this patch, the restricted admin setting will now be turned off by default. So it's either you allow X3RDP to be able to pass that patch and log in directly immediately, or you allow credentials to be stored in memory while you're logged in. It's, you know, it's one or the other. There's not a great solution there. Let's see. So detection. This is a slide that I really wanted to get to. There's not an easy way that I know of yet to do detection on this. And there's ways that you can get closer to good detection, but it's still very difficult. I was talking to a friend of mine that works in a very high security environment a little while ago, and I can't tell you much about him or that environment because I haven't asked him before I was presenting this talk, but we were sitting down talking, and I was explaining to him, here are all the ways that you can do this. You know, use the volume shadow copy service, use the powersploit ninjacopy app or script to basically do a file copy of the direct NTFS structures and copy these files off. How do you protect against that? What are you going to do to protect or detect or respond to that? And so we came up with, the ideas that we came up with was, first of all, do some intelligent log analysis. You'll need to go find what is that activity where these files off of that domain controller are being copied. There are products, for instance, like, I don't have my, I wish I had my notes here. I've got a whole separate page of notes that are my sticky notes to the slides, and I'll try to remember here as I go. There's some products that are starting to do some anomaly detection, like, for instance, I know Rapid7 is a sponsor here. Like, for instance, Rapid7 has a product called User Insight that's starting to do some of this. There's I believe it's a IBM product called QRadar, I think, that's starting to do some of this type of stuff. And what they're winding up doing is they're not detecting the actual log activity, they're detecting the anomalous user usage activity. So let's say you have admin that always logs onto a domain controller from system A, and eventually, you know, that same admin is seen logging onto a DC from, you know, system C or D or somebody else's system. It's gonna profile the normal usage of those accounts and wind up sending you an alert if there's usage that is anomalous. So that's an example of, you know, vendor tool. I'm not, you know, pitching their stuff. It's just something I've seen being used in the past. How do you deal without that stuff? Let's say you've got NetFlows running on your network. So you would look for high volume traffic that is not normally leaving a domain controller. So for instance, if you've got somebody that's copying off a 300, 400, you know, 700 meg file off of a DC that's not expected, alert on that. Go find the source workstation and go find out what's going on. Another thing that my friend and I came up with was in an environment, you've normally, you know, the recommendation is to have, you know, multiple domain controllers so that if one fails, one goes down and crashes, etc., you've got others that can pick up the authentication requests from other users. So the volume shadow copy service, being primarily used for backing up and reliability of a DC, why not just turn it off? So turn off the VSS service and then alert on whenever that service is turned on. So, you know, make sure that there's no volume shadow copies that exist on the DC, so you don't have the ability to actually copy those files from an existing one, but the service has to be running in order to use it, so just turn it off and then create an alert that'll say, you know, alert your sysadmins whenever it's turned on because it's not supposed to be being used. So that's an example. If you had a DLP on a DC, maybe file integrity monitoring that could help you alert to tools that aren't supposed to be there. Similar cryptographic settings for the logs. And you've got full PCAPs of all the egress traffic on your network, right? Something that's not commonly found. And for all this stuff, you know, feel free to come talk to me afterwards. I'm doing most of these things. I've got PCAPs of full PCAPs of all the stuff on our network right now, and it's a ton of fascinating data to go look through if you've ever done that.
Just NetFlows.
Yeah.
Instead of full PCAPs.
Sure. So a different type of monitoring and alerting. So asking about NetFlows. Sure. It's just different monitoring, different alerting. It'll alert you to that strange activity.
Full PCAPs, you know. Mm-hmm. In some networks that could be
sure. Yes.
Petabytes of information in a few days.
Right. So if it's something that's reasonable, if it's something that's allowable, Yeah, you can get a ton of good data from it, good analysis data. Just a ton of data. Yeah, you've got to have the right tools, for instance, to go through it. So if you have an IDS, you've got, like Security Onion or blanking on some of the other ones. The other company I was thinking about that's doing some of the similar stuff like this is a company called ThreatGrid that was just purchased by Cisco. They're doing some similar stuff as far as, log anomaly detection and logs and whatnot. Yeah, so that's a for instance. And that's it. So, especially, and I've got references, like I said, I'll post these slides. I know that's not legible, but I've got references for all that, and that'll be posted when the slides get posted. I'll post this stuff to my GitHub, and it'll be obviously part of the slides that are posted as part of the video as well. So, questions? Anything else?